Hi, folks. This is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report. You know, I've been thinking about some of the things that I have done in my fishing life that are really either stupid or I guess it would boil down to being stupid, because if you're not listening to the caution and the safety voice in your head, then you're being stupid. And so I wanted to discuss a few of those things. One of them, and boy, if any of you out there are thinking of fishing any of our streams with a canoe, this is something that I had to learn the hard way, is never, ever anchor in the current in a canoe with your anchor off the stern. Because what's happened is once the anchor takes, your boat will drift downstream from the anchor and you'll be fine. But as soon as you go to pull that anchor back in, you're going to be pulling your boat backwards against a current. And the stronger the current, the more dangerous this is. And the water will start pouring over the back of your canoe. And you can be capsized, you can drown. I mean, it's this significant. And I remember years ago, almost every year, especially with young soldiers that came to Fort Drum, and they didn't know any different than I did when I was young. And every year it seemed like people drowned. They did that very thing with canoes in the Black River there at Dexter, and the current is strong, and it's just an awful, sad thing that happens, and it happens over and over. And I got to tell you, a couple times when I did it, I remember one time in the Racket River, and I'm like, oh my God, I almost tipped that boat over. But I learned I would never do it again, and so I wanted to pass that on to you. Now, some of the other things that I wanted to discuss in this about don't do is one of the things that I have done over and over is fish areas along the St. Lawrence River from shore, especially at the causeways. And in most causeways, there's going to be a lot of broken rock. That's how they fill in along the road. And I got to tell you, here's my slogans. Broken rock leads to broken bones. Those rocks can become so slippery, and each one is a different size and a different shape, and your feet go out from under you, and the only thing you're going to fall on is rocks. And I've had it happen 2 or 3 times to me, and it's a miracle that I didn't break the bones in my leg or hip or whatever. But, you know, I guess I learned slowly, and I keep wanting to go back there and do that. But just remember, those broken rocks, maybe in the summertime when it's 90 degrees out, those rocks are dry. If you've got good balance, you can walk along slowly and get to stretches of water that you wouldn't normally be able to fish. But in the late fall, like now to winter, it can be really, really dangerous. Here's a third thing that has happened to me. Now, if you're not allergic to bees, this isn't as big a deal. But I got to tell you, ground bees, that's what I'm going to call them. They're bees that make their nest in the ground. And these bees can be the most aggressive, the most unbelievable. And for me, a couple of times, it's really been a risk to my life. I remember one time I was doing a show, and I told my cameraman, I says, I want to get right on this area. I'm going to walk down. I want you to capture it live. I know there's walleyes under that trunk that you see out there in the water, that stump. And so I started down. I was only looking at the water, and my foot went on a ground bee's nest. Up they came, and I started running back through the field as fast as I could go, which was nothing. And these bees pursued me, stung me in the face. My whole face by the end of the show was so swollen, I looked even more like a monster than I might normally. So this is something to be aware of. Every place that we go fishing out in the wild, there's a chance that there's ground bees there. The other thing that I want you to be aware of is poison ivy, poison oak, and hogweed. Along shorelines is an absolute wonderful spot for these things to grow, and they can really, really cause a lot of danger. The other thing that I think is important, and we take this for granted, is even not... I know people that stand up in canoes, and I've been guilty of doing that. But even standing up in boats when you're fishing, all it takes is a slip. You can fall, hit your head against the side of the boat, and I had a concussion from this once. I've also fallen in. Now, we're going back all the years of my life and all the shows I've done, but I remember one time falling over the back of a boat way up in the wilds of Canada and just being able to hold on to the motor and people pulled me back in. But so that can be a danger as well. And I guess, this probably won't apply to too many of you, but a lot of times if we're going to float a section of water, the best way is to leave one car up where you put your canoe in and then another car downstream where you're going to end your drift, your fish of the day. But one of the things that I've done over and over and over again is bite off more than I could chew. In other words, I get halfway through the drift, it's starting to get dark, and I'm like, oh my gosh, still got miles to go. And then I don't know how I can caution you against that, but try to be a little bit more conservative in how much area you think you can fish in a day. And finally, I think this is something we all should be aware of. Number one, the faster the current, in other words, the higher the water, the more dangerous it is to wade. There's more pressure against your legs. You have less balance. If you go in, you have less control of being able to stand up again. And finally, be very, very careful if you're going to wade where the bottom is muddy, because it's almost like quicksand. There's areas where your feet can sink into that mud and you won't be able to move. And if you got waders on, it can be deadly dangerous. So these are some of my don'ts that I wanted to pass on. Don't do what I've done through so many years, and you'll be safer. Until next time, folks, this is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report.